Hi there, it's Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, and this is Washington in Focus Daily. I'm Carleen Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, Senate Minority Leader John Braun and Senator Chris Gildon, who's the lead Republican on the budget on the minority, share their thoughts on the income tax, yet to be signed by the governor. Could happen any day now. Will the income tax deter the NBA from potentially bringing the Sonics back to Washington? We talked about that a few weeks ago. Senator Gildon has some thoughts on that that we'll share with you. Senator Shelley Short, who's from Addy, if you've never been to Addy, Washington, like many people in the western part of the state, that's the northeast corner of the state, Chelan County, Okanagan Ferry. There's some concerns that she has for her community about the income tax, and we'll have those have part of that conversation. I interviewed her this morning. And then there is a new report out today that paints a pretty remarkable picture of the success of charter schools and charter school graduates in Washington state. We only have a handful of these schools operating. And majority Democrats did more this session to make it harder for them to succeed. But it turns out alumni of charter schools are earning a lot more money than their peers graduating from traditional public schools. They're owning homes in their 20s, better jobs. The numbers don't really lie at all. So this was pretty fascinating. And I don't know if anybody else is covering this yet. So I'm excited to share some of what I learned with you. And then Vicki Murray, who is Washington Policy Center's director for their Center for Education, she weighs in on the topic, something she is truly passionate about. Before she came up here to Washington, when she was working in education realms in Arizona for 10 years, she was on the board, she told me, for a charter school in Arizona. So she believes in them. She doesn't really understand why there's so much resistance here in Washington. So we're going to be talking about that. All right, let's dive in. So Governor Ferguson, still waiting on him to sign the Washington State Millionaires Tax, Senate Bill 6346. Should be happening any day now. It was delivered to his office last Friday, the 13th. A bit ominous, right? Following passage by the Senate 2 days prior. He has by law 20 days from delivery to act on the bill. So it could be any day. It could also be, up until the very end, April the 2nd. Who knows if he's going to veto any line items in that, if he's going to have any comments, or just kind of give it a rubber stamp as is. Remember, the final version that passed did not include nearly the level of tax relief that he originally said. I won't sign an income tax. He never called it that. I won't sign the millionaire's tax unless it includes this much tax relief for small business and this much for working families. And it came up rather short of his what he said he would stand for. We'll see what he has to say. But this, again, is a tax that is projected to bring in anywhere from $3 to maybe $4 billion a year to fund education, state services, some tax breaks for business, and then the rest of it into the general fund. And the majority party can use it for whatever they then choose. Today, I did get a chance to interview Senate Minority Leader John Braun and Senator Chris Gildon of Puyallup. As I mentioned, Senator Gildon is the ranking minority member on the Senate budget. They delivered last year in the longer session a no new taxes balanced budget that really got nowhere with the majority, unfortunately, but it's something he's pretty passionate about. Senator Braun told me actually today that he anticipates one or more legal challenges and probably a citizen initiative. We're still waiting to hear something on that, but he says it's all going to take time to play out. So here's part of the conversation today with Senate Minority Leader John Braun.
On the legislative majority leaders and the speaker. I fully expect there to be at least one. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple legal challenges. And the legalities, this are very, very obvious to anyone who wants to take the time to read the Constitution. But I think they believe they have an opening because of the nature of the state Supreme Court. But in no case does any kind of legal action happen very fast. That's going to take a year, I would think minimum, maybe 2 years. The precedent is clear, so the lower courts are obliged, as I understand it, to follow the precedent. So I think we probably win early, but the real test is with the state Supreme Court. So I'm a little nervous that if they sue and the news gets out they won at the local level, people will think, oh, the pressure's off, but that's just the first round. And there is a lot of talk out there. I'm not personally involved a lot in it, but about an initiative. I expect one in the next 2 years. I don't know whether it'll be this year or next year. The people are really worked up about this. Not the people paying the tax. The people who are paying the tax are also worked up about it, but they're just making plans to leave the state. Everybody else who may not pay the tax immediately is pretty pissed. At least the ones I talk to are pretty upset about it. In my neck of the woods, I haven't talked to a single person that's happy about this, and I've talked to a lot of them that are just downright mad about it.
So then Senator Gildon brought up the Sonics. There have been rumors around here for years that the NBA might bring the team back to Seattle. And as we reported about a month ago, Governor Ferguson's team was urged to prep him in early February for a meeting with NBA Commissioner Adam Silver. At the time, Ferguson was reportedly urged to prepare to discuss concerns over, you can see here, the high cost of maintaining a team, the impact of employer layoffs, i.e., fewer employees equals fewer ticket sales for the team, and challenges posed by the millionaire's tax on recruiting top players. They also just overall, I guess this was a reference to the tax climate here in the state of Washington, whether Seattle remains an attractive and investor friendly environment. So that's what happened last month. Who knows what really happened behind closed doors in that conversation with the NBA commissioner and some of Governor Ferguson's leadership. And if they said, dude, you pass this thing, we're not bringing a team here, or they said, go ahead and pass it, just publicly, we have to resist. Who knows what that conversation really, what really came from that conversation. I guess we'll find out in short order. But Senator Gildon had something to say about this today.
I mean, this has a direct effect on that because states like Texas and Florida that do not have an income tax have a built-in advantage over states that do have an income tax, such as California and New York. I wouldn't say so much as if the team comes here, but I would say which players decide to come to that particular team, right? Because almost all of those players are going to make north of $1 million and they're going to be subject to the income tax. And they're going to be calculating what their net income is going to be. And if they're, paying a lot of, 10% tax, they're going to make some choices about that. So I would say, you were talking about the tax layering effect of the B&O tax, the income tax, the sales tax, the property tax, all of the taxes that we have that layer one on top of another. And just whether you're talking about business or basketball, tax policy matters.
I also today had the opportunity to interview Senator Shelley Short of Addy about the income tax and concerns from her constituents in the 7th District, which is in that northeast corner of our state. If you don't get there, a lot of people go there for, Chelan County. It's also Okanagan, Stevens, Ferry County. She's got 7 counties that kind of overlap pieces of those counties in her district. So it's a rather large area. A lot of rural, constituents in that area, rural hospitals, a lot of agricultural interests. So she has a different perspective on the impacts of this income tax for her district.
The agricultural community for sure, small businesses, construction companies. I think of our manufacturers, the more that they continue to pile on taxes and regulations and everything else, it makes it harder and harder for manufacturers to step up and to maybe, put that next shift into place, which provides jobs in our communities. You look at the tax structure, but you look at our energy structure too. If you're a manufacturer that uses a lot of electricity to importantly manufacture something we need, those jobs are all at risk. The money that they make is considered income, personal income, in an S corp or an LLC. And so when you start looking at that income, now that income could be saved to construct the next house or buy the next land, or, the things that builders have to do up front before they can build or sell a home. So I think that is where I really see significant concern.
So once this bill is signed into law by the governor, we're going to wait to find out then who will be launching the legal challenge, where, what part of the state that's going to be coming from. Of course, which court it goes through. The court process, is always really important in whether you think you're going to get a favorable ruling from a more conservative minded court, or if they're going to just launch from Thurston County and go from there. Obviously, state Supreme Court is where this thing's going to end up eventually. And then we're waiting to find out if, in fact, a citizen initiative will be launched. My sources tell me we're working on it, but we can't release anything at this point. So we don't know. And whether or not that will happen, as Senator Braun was suggesting, if that's going to happen this year, while there's momentum and the public is so outraged over the passage of this, or if it makes sense to kind of wait till next year while legal things are already underway, and then you've got time to gather signatures. Remember, we've already got two initiatives going to be on the November ballot, the restoration of parental rights and protecting girls in sports. So we'll wait to see if it makes sense to capitalize now on the momentum or wait until next year when there's not so much clutter going on. And it's also not, busy election year. So we're on top of it, and I'm in close contact with the folks in the know. So now to charter schools in a new report showing some pretty remarkable outcomes for charter graduates. It's called Turning the Tassel in Washington State. That was the title of the report that came out just today. I got the opportunity to sit down with the folks who crafted the report and some of the folks that are leaders in the charter school effort here in Washington State. On Monday evening, we did a little, sort of pre report session, and I got to see some of the highlights. And this study was really designed to look at what life looks like for young adults after high school graduation. And they looked at beyond the traditional metrics, right? Graduation rates, standardized test scores. They wanted to look at more comprehensive sort of early adult outcomes, like continuing education, employment, financial stability, income. Do you own a home? I mean, there's a lot of things there that they looked at. It was admittedly a relatively small sample, and in large part, that's because we don't have very many charter schools in the state of Washington. They had about 100 graduates, starting back from 2019 graduates to where we are now, that took part in the survey. And the results are pretty compelling and worth a closer look. Remember, Washington did not even get charter schools until 2014. It took years of fighting the Washington Education Association. It took citizen initiatives. Then there were multiple court challenges. Charter schools are public schools, but they don't receive as much funding. And so it's a real challenge for them to even remain in operation. We've got 15 of them across the state right now, and still a limited number of students served in the settings. But I want to remind you that these are some of the most vulnerable students, many low income families, kids with highly specialized needs. There's a school for teen parents so they can stay in school. Their little ones can be in an adjacent daycare setting so that they can move on in their lives. And based on findings in this report, those charter school graduates are making way more money on average. Many of them, it sounds like way more money than you or I probably, than graduates from traditional public schools. And many of them already owning their own homes, even though they're in their 20s. And I thought that was pretty remarkable and worth a closer look. So I'm going to rattle off some of the findings here because I think it paints a picture of real world success for these charter graduates. And remember, only 1 out of every 200 public school students in the state of Washington is in a charter school versus a traditional public school. One of the findings, here's a big one. We're going to put this up on the screen for you. Employed Look at this. Employed Washington charter school alumni earn an average of more than $120,000 a year compared to just over $76,000 for district alumni. That's a $44,000 gap. Pretty darn significant. Here is another one for you. Charter graduates are far more likely to be working a full-time job. It's a huge gap. And of course, once you get out of high school, whether you're going to trades, you're going to, post-secondary education, you're just looking to be gainfully employed, that's a pretty wide gap. A couple of other ones I want to mention. 83% of charter school alumni are working part-time or full-time compared to 62% of district alumni. And I'm going to read one more. This is from the report, which, by the way, I'm preparing an article today, which we'll put up at thecentersquare.com/Washington with links to all this in case you're curious. But 47% of Washington charter school alumni report owning their home compared to 18% of district alumni. You find me any 20-something now that owns their home, and I'll shake their hand and congratulate them because home ownership is, obviously cost prohibitive in the state of Washington. And I found that to be something to be modeled after. We need to figure out what the heck these schools are doing right and what these graduates are doing right. So today I did interview Washington Policy Center's Education Center Director, Vicki Murray. She is a charter school advocate. Spent 10 years, she told me, on a charter school board. I assume that was in Arizona, though I didn't ask her, but that's where she came from. And she simply cannot understand why there was so much resistance to charter schools in Washington.
And Washington has not lifted its cap on public charter schools, so they're dying by attrition. But when you see the consistent research, including the latest research that came from our State Board of Education, charter schools are working, and they're working with children who are not typically served well in a traditional public setting. The success, sadly, in a largely monopolistic system is its downfall, because you're making the status quo look bad. And charter schools are doing more with less. And that's the story we've heard again and again, state after state, city after city that has embraced charter schools. We see this pattern. In fact, there was recent research done across 9 major metropolitan cities in the United States. And it found not only were, as you'd expect, charter schools are serving predominantly low-income children with all sorts of special needs. And guess what? Charter schools that get less funding, these, for every dollar invested in a charter school, the return on investment averaged across those 9 cities is about $6.50.
Wow.
Compared to the return on investment for a traditional public school of $3 and change. So, I mean, the returns are just enormous, I think. And instead of fighting or denying or trying to squeeze them out, we should be looking at what charter schools are doing, because look at the charter schools we have in our state. They're serving, for example, teenage parents. They are serving, they're doing all sorts of incredible things. Children who would otherwise be left behind, they're thriving.
So for all the great news in this report about life success for charter school graduates in Washington state, unfortunately, I inform you that majority Democrats just cut major funding for charter schools in this session that ended last week. And I should remind you, they already receive less funding because charter schools in the state of Washington are not allowed a cut of the local levies that supplement schools. They get the same per pupil funding on the state level, but say you're Seattle school district, and I know they've got a couple of charters, or at least did have a couple of charters in the Seattle school district. If local districts there pass these enrichment levies, the charters aren't allowed any access to those funds. So they're already operating on these shoestring budgets, and yet we just took away $7.5 million from their funding for this year. That was what ended up in the state operating budget was when it was finalized. It is a major blow to charter schools in the state of Washington, and ironically, at a time where we have a report like this. Chris Korsmo is the executive director of the Washington State Charter Schools Association. He put up a post on March the 11th about this. He said, charter public school students are public school students. They are not asking for a special carve out. They just want to be invested in. It is disheartening that our legislature has reversed its approach for the past 2 school years and made this inequity in our public school system worse. These students are asking for the same support as every other public school student in Washington. They deserve to be believed in. And he was pretty clear that without the funding, they're going to face some impossible choices, cutting teachers that often don't make as much as teachers in traditional public school settings, eliminating some of the academic interventions that are there. I think about like the daycare center that's tied to the school in Spokane for teen parents that allows them to continue on and graduate on time, and perhaps, based on this report we've been discussing, even have grander success than they ever imagined. I am working on this story for publication later today with links to the report that will be in the article. I did, by the way, reach out to the Washington Education Association for comment because they have been so they've been the force, the tide against charter schools from well before they ever were established in the state of Washington. I did not receive a response from the WEA. And that's it for today's, on that happy note, that's it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. I do thank you for watching, and check out the centersquare.com Washington page. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Again, thanks for watching.